Welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about protein, the ins and outs, and the fact that for the first time in 70 years, the guidelines have increased by up to 100% for the daily recommended allowance. And each week I go over all sorts of different topics and give you the lowdown, the actual facts, and some of my opinion. So by all means, please hit that follow, watch my other videos. And if you're ever stuck on a week where you just don't feel like anything's going to plan, I've created something called the Can't Be Asked plan. It's an absolutely perfect plan to keep you moving forward even on the shit weeks. If you want your copy of it, just go to the end of the description in this video and the link's in there. You are welcome. So without further ado, let's get on with it. The United States government, for the first time in 70 years, have changed the recommended daily amount of protein that you should be getting. And they haven't just upped it a little bit, between 50 to 100% increase in the RDA, recommended daily amount, which is huge. So there's every chance that you're probably under eating the amount of protein you need. And in fact, previously, the numbers they give, not the appropriate amount for creating and preserving lean muscle mass, developing strength, and the list goes on. So today we are going to delve a little bit deeper into protein, the nuances of it, the benefits of it, and hopefully walk away with a better understanding of why we as coaches harp on about protein, but also the amounts that you should be getting, but also how to get them without just living a life of chicken and broccoli and sadness. So what does protein actually do? There's four main things that it does. So it helps preserve and build muscle mass. So especially if you're in a calorie deficit, your body doesn't just burn fat as fuel. It can burn muscle as fuel because obviously the energy coming in is less than the body needs. But in order to offset that, we need to make sure that A, we're doing some form of strength training, but B, we're also taking in appropriate amounts of protein, which is going to help offset that potential wastage coming from being in a deficit. Making sure that you do have an adequate protein amount going into the body actually sends a signal to the brain, like a preserve signal, so the body will stop using muscle as fuel and continue just to use those fat stores instead. Secondly, protein just keeps you fuller for longer. So we know that of all the macronutrients, it takes the longest to digest, meaning that you get that feeling of satiation, that's a mouthful, for much longer than, let's say, from a carbohydrate source, certainly a simple carbohydrate. So keeping you fuller for longer is a primary role of protein, specifically if we're talking about fat loss. The benefit of this is you are less inclined to snack on anything or to have extra large portions of meals because you have that feeling of fullness. So by the time you get to your next meal, you're not getting to it feeling ravenous, you get into it feeling I'm ready to eat something now, and it becomes a more informed choice. So having that appropriate level of protein and thusly that feeling of fullness helps to make better food choices throughout the entirety of the day. It can help keep you from over consuming calories you might otherwise consume. Third on the list, it has the highest thermic effect of any macronutrient. So what do I mean by that? Simply, it uses more calories to digest it, to break it down, than all the other macronutrients. So you may consume, let's say, 100 calories worth of protein. 30 of those calories are going to be used in the digestive process, meaning that you only actually absorb 70% of those calories. So it takes the longest to digest, and consequently it also takes the most amount of energy to break down. So when you're thinking about being in a calorie deficit, ding, 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 protein again is not only going to keep you full, as in point 2, but it also means that you absorb only 70% of the calories approximately from a protein source, whereas if you were to look at something like a carbohydrate, you absorb somewhere around 90% of the calories from a carbohydrate, and when you look at something like fats, you probably absorb somewhere between 95 to 99% of the calories from fats, because it's just so easily metabolized and doesn't take much energy to break it down. And lastly, number 4, protein helps with muscle repair and recovery. In the absence of that, the muscle really struggles to repair and recover from any exertion whatsoever. And especially if you're doing any form of resistance training, strength training, which I urge you to do, and I shouldn't have to tell you now because surely you've seen enough of these to know, but you need to get stronger. And when we're doing strength training of any description, we're making tears of the fibers of the muscles, and the body needs protein to help repair that and refuel the muscle specifically. So if there isn't enough protein, we're just damaging, and we're not actually getting any, or we're getting a much slower repair of the muscle over time with not having an adequate amount of protein in the diet. So there's 4 really important reasons to be making sure you are eating adequate amount of protein, which leads me on to how much should you be eating? So this is something that might reframe the way that you think about your protein requirements and the recommended amounts of it. Historically, the protein math has always been around 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, which, I hasten to add, was the recommended bare minimum, not the optimal amount. The bare minimum was 0.8 times by your body weight in kilos. So for someone weighing around 75 grams, that would be approximately 60 grams of protein per day. So this is daily. But as I say, that's the absolute bare minimum. Those numbers are there to prevent protein deficiency, to stop people becoming malnourished. So it's the minimum amount to avoid a health problem, and was never intended to represent the optimal amount for muscle retention, fat loss, recovery, or healthy aging. And the research has been saying this for years. A 2025 systemic review published in Science Direct found that the higher protein intakes of between 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight compared to the standard 0.8 grams significantly preserved lean mass, muscle mass, and improved body composition in adults of all age groups during fat loss. And then in January 2026, the new US dietary guidelines eventually caught up. And after 70 years of the same recommendation, they've increased said RDA, recommended daily amount, to the 1.2 to the 1.6 range of grams per kilo of body weight. And that's a 50 to 100% increase from previous guidelines. So seemingly the science knew, but the guidelines took a little time to catch up. So how much do you actually need? Let's talk about that. The current evidence-based consensus for most people trying to lose fat while maintaining muscle looks like this. If you're doing little to no resistance training at all, aim for approximately 1.2 grams per kilo of body weight. So for an 80 kilo person, that's approximately 96 grams of protein, but I would probably tell you just to round up and make that a nice round 100 grams would be an optimal amount. If you're doing regular resistance training 2 or 3 times a week, then we're looking at the 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight, which for another person who weighs 80 kilo is somewhere around 128 grams of protein, again rounded up about 130. And in a systemic review of over 49 studies and nearly 2,000 participants, found there was no significant additional benefit of eating more than 1.6 grams per body weight in kilos. However, if you're in a significant calorie deficit and training hard, some research supports going up to 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight to maximally protect muscle mass. Age-related things can come into the equation, and the advice is anywhere over 60 years old, aim for around 1.2 grams per kilo of body weight, because age-related muscle mass loss, sarcopenia, accelerates from your mid-50s onwards. And a higher protein intake is one of the most well evidenced ways to slow that down. In practical terms, I recommend to most of my clients somewhere between 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. It's a range that covers most people's needs. It's also achievable without obsessing over every meal, and gives you enough margin to hit your targets even when meals aren't perfectly planned some days. But as is often the case, most people aren't eating enough protein. They think they are, but they're not. A standard diet without intentional increases in protein would generally equate to somewhere around 0.8 to 1.2 grams per body weight, which is only just enough to preserve potentially the lean mass you've already got. But if you're on a fat loss, you're going to be losing muscle mass in there as well, because that equation is just too low. That equation is just to stop you from dying. And the problem is often that trying to find protein-rich foods are just more of a challenge, especially if you're grabbing on the go. A sandwich, a wrap, or whatever, a salad box, whatever it might be. Food that you grab on the go that doesn't take much effort and conscious decision is generally not as rich in proteins as a more informed decision. And then there's always this misconception, perhaps, that all you need to eat is chicken, because that's what's kind of portrayed, I suppose, in the old school ways. But getting high protein meals and snacks and alternatives nowadays, you can't walk down an aisle without seeing something with protein stuck all over it. But I would urge you to make sure you're reading the packaging, because often they're not any better than a pure or natural choice. In the shop I go to, they sell a protein yogurt. But if I just get 0% fat-free Greek yogurt, I actually get more protein and less calories. So sometimes it pays to read the label and not get pulled in just by the fact that it's got protein written on the outside of it. But availability of protein now and the awareness around protein is a lot higher. And I think people are starting to understand more of the importance, but still don't understand the nitty-gritty and what's appropriate. So to lay it out in a kind of a plan for a day, you could start the day with something like a 3-egg scramble on rye bread or sourdough, for example. You've just hit 18 to 20 grams of protein. For your lunch, you might have 150 grams of chicken breast cut through with some wholemeal pasta, salad, and some light mayonnaise. There we're talking around 45 grams of protein, maybe a little bit more. 0% Greek yogurt with some fresh berries as an afternoon snack. There's another 15 to 20 grams of protein. And then finish the day with something like 150 grams of salmon fillets, some new potatoes, and some asparagus. There's another 35 to 40 grams of protein in that meal. So we've got anything from 115 to 120 odd grams of protein throughout a day, not by having supplements and shakes and protein bars and protein puddings, but just eating a normal diet, but ensuring that there's some protein of a natural source on each of the meals. The other thing worth mentioning is protein distribution. So the research does show that spreading your protein out throughout numerous meals of the day stimulates muscle protein synthesis more effectively than, let's say, trying to eat the same amount over 1 or 2 meals. And just to pick up on my previous video about intermittent fasting and just giving yourself a much shorter window to eat, obviously then impacts on that muscle protein synthesis, because we're not spreading it out throughout the day. We're trying to get all of our protein in a potentially much shorter window. Now we're going to try and destroy some myths. We're going to do some myth busting. High protein diets damage your kidneys. That's a myth, I hasten to add. I'll jump in straight in with that. And this is a myth that's probably never going to die. With people that have pre-existing kidney issues, having a high protein diet can be an issue. But for healthy people with no kidney issues, no evidence supports this myth. Multiple large reviews have found no adverse effects from high protein intake on the kidneys or the liver. So the myth had originated from people that already had some form of kidney issue, and then it became misapplied to general public. Another myth is that your body can only absorb 30 grams of protein per meal. Again, not true. The body can absorb essentially all of the protein that you give it. What the research actually shows, that anywhere between 25 and 40 grams of protein is enough to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. But eating any more than that isn't wasted. It's just used for other purposes and then stored as energy. Another old school one is you've got to eat protein straight after a workout for optimal gains. Also not true. The so-called anabolic window, the idea that you have to eat protein within 30 minutes within this anabolic window post-workout, is significantly overstated. The research shows that the window for muscle protein synthesis is much wider, several hours wider. Getting adequate protein throughout the day is more important than the exact timings, especially post-workout. So having some protein within a couple of hours after you've been training is probably a good habit to have. The muscles will thank you for it, but it doesn't mean that you've missed the window if you're over 30 minutes of workout, or trying to get a shake in immediately post-workout. Your muscles will ultimately take that protein on when they're given it. A simple tip that I kind of give most people about trying to get protein into their diet, and this is long before we look at grams and calorie counting and everything else, is just about prioritizing protein with each meal and building meals back from the initial protein source. So for breakfast, you may have eggs and you build back from that. So that's your protein source. You want some carbohydrates, you can have some wholemeal bread. You want some good fats, you might have, I don't know, quarter of avocado cut up over the top of it. It may be that you're having a Greek yogurt for breakfast with some mixed berries and a bit of granola on top. Whatever it is, we're going to build from the protein source backwards, not build a meal around the carbohydrate, try and slide in some vegetables somewhere because we know they're good for us, and then lastly think about adding some protein into it. So create meals based on the protein source and then work backwards from there. That in its own right, if you did nothing else, would instantly increase your daily protein amount. So try it. You've got literally nothing to lose apart from muscle. Another thing to consider is I'm an avid supporter of protein shakes, of which there are varying types, styles, isolates, beef whey, all sorts. But don't become reliant on protein shakes or a protein bar. They are something that can help supplement the protein you're already achieving through your normal diet. They're a quick, easy, and low-calorie option that have a place, and they certainly have a place in my overall diet, to increase my protein intake simply and quickly. But we should all still be trying to get it from our food sources, and protein shakes and such like are an additional, not a sole contributor to your protein intake. So just be mindful of that. But they're absolutely brilliant as a late afternoon snack almost, because if you have one of them post lunch and pre-dinner, it's just going to give you that feeling of fullness, and it can top up your protein by 20-25 grams depending on which protein powder you use. So use them by all means, don't be reliant on them. So protein isn't complicated. I think people are potentially misinformed about amounts that are appropriate, needs, how to get it, and hopefully this has helped clear some of that up and given you a little bit more clarity and some takeaways that you could almost action straight away. So if you've got any questions about protein, or you want to tell me something I perhaps don't know, which is many things I hasten to add, then please, by all means, drop me a comment. I'd love to hear back from you. Subscribe wherever I put it this week, and I'll see you all next time.